Hi, this is Teresa Schaff, and this is my final ethics individual presentation. The topic I chose was from the book 6.30. One ethical argument against offshoring jobs is that employee health and safety requirements are not as strong in some countries as they are in the United States. Evaluate this argument. Offshoring is the practice of basing some of the company's processes or services overseas so as to take advantage of lower cost. Improvements in transportation and communications has moved manufacturing from wealthier countries to less wealthy countries. The difference in what they pay in the new country is enough to make up for these extra costs. Common jobs are data processing, computer programming, and call centers. Some of the problems are language differences, and sometimes they're reading from a script and they really don't have deep knowledge of the product. Health and safety conditions in other countries may be run down, crowded, lack air conditioning and other health facilities. Offshoring jobs does not always increase their standard of living. One argument against globalization is that multinationals offshore to emerging markets to avoid environmental, health, and safety regulations in the developed world. Most of what we buy in developing countries is grown or manufactured by workers whose rights are ignored in important ways. Cell phone components from China, fruit grown in Mexico, and the Indian cotton in your shirt are commonly processed by workers who are not paid minimum wage, that are exposed to hazardous chemicals or dangerous machinery, and forced to work overtime, and then they're prevented from organizing to help negotiate changes in such conditions. Unlike in the U.S., we have unions that have fought for those rights of their employees. U.S. companies doing business internationally often find that the host country laws and regulations are far more lenient in areas of environmental protection, human rights, health and safety, labor standards than they are in the United States. And since developing nations suffer from inadequate education, health resources, and poor physical infrastructures, when corporations invest in their nation, they often have expectations that they'll get needed improvements in their roads, hospital, school, bridges, clean water, and other environmental standards in the facilities and in the country in general. The offshore employees come to expect policies that cover such issues as prohibitions on child and prison labor, wages and hours, living conditions, worker safety, adherence to environmental standards, non-discrimination, and non-harassment. And these are probably higher standards than what they would normally have in their country. And some of this can be based on local law or, the standards of the U.S. that are bringing the corporations in, that they adopt these as they establish in other countries. The responsibilities of international corporations with health and safety are to set policies to create decent working conditions, both in their own facilities and facilities of the third-party suppliers. Policies must be made by implementing systems and processes in education and training, leadership development, protocols for qualifying and requalifying suppliers, as well as for assessing second and third tier suppliers, and imposing real sanctions when suppliers violate standards. They must be subject to verification for credibility. In 1990, under the Apparel Agreement, Apple was forced to improve working condition in their Chinese factories because it was brought to light that they were very poor. Occupational health and safety, the workers are a lifeline of any firm, and they have a right to be protected against any injury, illness, or death that might be caused due to workplace hazards. Some of these hazards are unavoidable or natural, while others can be prevented at a certain cost. Most of the firms try to avoid these costs and ignore consequences of an accident, and this leads to a huge controversy between the organization and workers on a moral ground. Multinational companies are prone to use political influence and legal compliance as strategies to modify their moral responsibilities, whether those relate to the environment, human rights, or the health of workers abroad. So when these other countries can be bought, or their legal compliance is lower in standards, sometimes multinational companies use these. Environmental issues in particular, they seek short-term economic benefits by damaging the natural environment when they can do so legally. And this can affect the company's reputation when it's brought to light, and they can also be assessed large damages in foreign courts. The U.S. has a proud tradition of unions and oversight boards that help prevent such abuses of child labor, denial of overtime pay, exposure to toxic substances, stifling hot working environments. And that's why a lot of immigrants cross the border to come into our country hoping for a fairer, better paying job than they can find in their homelands. In the same way, the companies we go into, we want to avoid sweatshop business where workers are treated poorly because they're just going to create poorly made goods. And the reputation of the company, if a watchdog group comes, will link their brands to these workplace abuses, and that could injure their future profits. Secondly, respect for human rights leads to social and economic development. Some say that labor standards raise costs and thus limit the number of jobs that would otherwise be available to poor people. But fair work is a critical underpinning of social stability. That's what I had for the health and safety as U.S. companies offshore to other countries. And these are the references that I used. Thank you.